Hello and welcome to Weekly MTG, a hotly anticipated one because we today are going to talk about BNR philosophy. Underline under the philosophy part, because here's what's going to happen today. We're going to talk about how the esteemed minds over in Studio X think about bans and restrictions. What we're not going to do is tell you what cards are affected next week, if anything. We will be specific about formats, though, so stay tuned for that. But we won't tell you exactly what cards. Now, they're going to talk you through a lot of their thoughts about formats and the way they think, so you might be able to glean some clues and make some guesses in the meantime. But we're not going to be specific. Now, before we get to that and before we introduce our two fantastic panelists, a quick reminder that MagicCon Chicago tickets have gone on sale yesterday. And based on early sales numbers, a ton of you are going to be there. I'm going to be there. It's going to be a great time. If you head to MC Chicago at mtgfestivals.com, you'll be able to check out what's going on at MC Chicago and purchase tickets. But now let's get to the main event. First of all, who are you two, and why should people care what you think about BNR?
Hi, I'm Dan Musser. I manage the competitive play design team. I joined Wizards about 6 years ago to work on Modern Horizons 1 at the time, and then, now we're here.
Yeah. I'm Andrew. I'm the lead of the play design team, and I work on all the Magic sets.
Yep, you do, and you've been leading the BNR meetings lately as well. So, if there are two people who are focused on BNR, it's these two folks here. So we're going to spend some time picking their brains. We will get to questions later. We have a bunch of stuff we're going to talk about first, but we will get to questions. So if you put questions in chat now, I may miss them. I'll let you know when it's time. But feel free to put them in. We'll see if we get to them. So let's start big picture, like biggest picture we can. We'll narrow down. We'll get to formats and all that sort of stuff in a bit. But talk a bit about your overall philosophy when it comes to banning cards.
Sure. So the first thing I think we want to talk about is why does the BNR list even exist, right? So what we're generally trying to do is just make the formats as fun as possible, while also keeping up with players playing it, new cards being released constantly. So, over the course of a long period of time, people are going to make decks, people are going to understand what to do, what to make with the best combination of cards, and we need to make sure that our formats can be replayable and fun. So sometimes that involves us taking a card out, sometimes it means putting a card back in, but generally we try to keep things as healthy as possible, as fun as possible for the most amount of people.
Yeah, fun is the key there. We want you to enjoy what you're doing, and sometimes metagames just evolve, or cards released and they have unexpected interactions, or simply they're too strong. We do a lot of work to try and keep things in a band of reasonable health, but outliers happen. We do take some risks, and we want it to be exciting, and but not for you to experience the same punishing cards over and over and over again.
Now, fun can be somewhat subjective. When
Yep.
one person finds fun, another person doesn't.
Yeah.
So what are the what are the metrics, what are the things that the individual data points that you all look at and discuss when you're determining is something fun, is it working for a format or not?
I was just going to say we involve a lot of people in those kind of discussions, and so everyone has like a sort of different background, and they have a different play experience, different life experience, and so we try and just everyone does have a different definition of fun, like you said, but ideally we have enough sort of different play styles and types of people with different risk tolerances, and sort of form a nice holistic picture to get an average fun, net fun, I guess you would call it.
Yeah. Like we play these formats constantly. We look at the data when it comes to things that we can glean off of MTGO and MTGA. We take all of that into consideration as well. So it's generally a lot of things happening all at once when it comes to what influences us on these decisions.
So what sort of data are you looking at? Are you looking at play rate, win rate?
All of that stuff.
All of that, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if a deck is around for a long time and it's winning, at a higher clip than other decks for a long time, that's something we'll definitely have an eye on. If there is a deck that wins a lot, and even if it's a short, small, sort of a balance between those two numbers. A high win rate, but not a lot of people playing it. Maybe it's a very difficult deck to play. Maybe people, something like that. We will maybe keep that in play for a little longer. But yeah, when those two things collide and play rate plus win rate gets too much, definitely a thing we will have under our scrutiny.
But again, I do want to stress that it's always a confluence of things. Like, we look at the funness, we look at the numbers, we look at other factors. It's not just one of those things. It's always a confluence of those.
Yeah. Well, and one of the interesting things I always find fascinating about those discussions is that sort of next step that you take. All right, if we make this move, what effect does that have on the format as a whole? How deep do you all go in that space?
Yeah, it's important to kind of like understand, hey, if we do this thing, what are the ramifications of this? Another piece of information that I think the public doesn't really consider a lot is that we know generally what cards are going to be released in the pipeline. So we can kind of make an inference on what we think will happen. Obviously, it's really hard because there are so many players and there are so many of us. But we try to keep our predictions, as within line as we can, thinking about future cards, thinking about what we think the community is going to do with all these cards. So it's really a lot to track, and
it's you're kind of like going all over the place with your graphs and your data and your sentiment. You don't want to go too far down that, I would call it a rabbit hole of like predictions, because every prediction you make has a little error bars around it, right?
Yeah.
Even the cards we release have error bars around it. We think it's going to land here, but maybe it's 5% up or 5% down. And so every time we will, take an action, we can go maybe one step and we'll be like, right 5% less of the time each step down that road. So it's all probabilistic in nature.
All right, so the other thing we wanted to cover up top is the date. So we've got this one coming up on December 4th. We just had one on September 8th. We announced the new cadence this past summer. We announced a window, but we're kind of tweaking that window a little bit, correct?
Yeah, so it's really nice for you all to be able to expect when things are going to happen, and we want to maintain that. But sort of locking ourselves into like a single date, when we have a lot of things going on, there's events, there's new sets coming out. We want to have a little bit of flexibility, so we want to move to about a 2 to 5 week window after each main set's release, during which we'll take action, and we'll do our best to give you as much advance notice as we can when those windows, the date inside that window will be.
Yeah. Speaking of advance notice, so December 4th is our next one. When is the one after that going to be?
That's going to be right after Murders at Karlov Manor.
Yep, good work.
And I believe that date is now March 11th.
Yeah.
Which I think is the 5th week after.
Yeah.
Someone will have to look up the dates, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think we landed on that date because the Pro Tour features Pioneer, and we want to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, you'll both be at Chicago, and we want to be able to observe results, as many results as we can. Like Andrew said, where we get all our data from, Magic Online, Magic Arena. But Pioneer's not on Magic Arena, so it's nice to have more real big events to get the clearest picture possible to take an action before. Before we take an action, rather.
Yeah. Now, Andrew, when we rolled out that new window, we did make a very clear statement on how we were treating the we'll call it the rotation BNR announcement, and then the ones throughout the year. So do you want to talk more about that?
So the thing I do want to make clear again is that in these more frequent windows after a set release, we will not be changing standard for the most part. It would be very rare if we ever made an action in standard, not during the rotation window. So for example, December 4th, coming up in March, you can pretty much expect no changes in standard unless something pretty outstanding or not outstanding, ridiculous happens.
Yeah.
And like we said previously, most of the standard changes will be happening when rotation happens, when the fall set comes out. So that would be, can I say the name?
Yeah, we've announced all the names.
Okay,
for
okay,
next
cool,
year's
cool, cool. For when Bloomborough comes out.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you're talking about those mistakes or outliers for standard, can you give some examples of past
Right,
cards?
Yeah. So I think probably the best example is Felidar Guardian.
Yeah.
Where after probably about a week or 2 weeks of playing, you can already tell that it's not fun to play against. It's really, really strong, and people are going to do it a lot to win. And that is kind of the triple confluence of things that are going to make us do something immediately.
Okay. So talk a little bit more then about, I think we've talked about standard a bit. Let's talk about the philosophies for other formats. So let's just go right down the line from kind of standard to all the way down to vintage. So let's hit Pioneer next. What is sort of the philosophy around Pioneer?
Yeah, so the same philosophy for all the formats is, excuse me, quite true. Fun, replayable, a good amount of decks that you can have options to play. Pioneer's in sort of a unique spot where it's sort of the largest set that gets its content directly through like the standard pipeline, but it doesn't rotate. It doesn't have content that's like directly printed into it. So when we made Pioneer, we were quite enthusiastic. We were taking a lot of action, right? It was wide open. Every month we'd have multiple bans, and that kept the format flowing, kept evolving. We're just trying to figure out where the end point of that is. We had a pandemic. A lot of tabletop play ceased. It's not on a Magic Arena. It was only played a little bit on Magic Online. So we kind of took a pause, took a beat. Tabletop play came back, and I'll say we haven't really gotten back to that cadence of maintenance that it requires. Because it doesn't have a natural exit point for its cards, and only the strongest cards from Standard really get there. And we want that. We want you to have a place to play your Standard cards when they rotate. It's just going to require more caretaking from us. And so our plan is to use the sort of cadence we just described, where there's a restricted window after every set, to really take better care of the format.
So let's ask this directly. Will there be Pioneer changes on December 4th?
Yeah, so we've been monitoring a bunch of the new happenings with LCI. But we've been looking at it for quite some time, even before that, and listening to the community, and we want it to be fun. So we've been watching the last few, I believe, the regional championship events over the last couple weekends since LCI has released. Lots going on, a lot has changed. We were concerned the format was just like stuck a little bit. Wild Dragon came out and had a sleight of hand. And we saw the Phoenix deck start coming back, rise from the ashes, as you will. So that was pretty sweet. There was some movement going on there. And then clearly with Lost Caverns, the Discover decks are all over the place. Amalia has a cool little Wild Growth Walker combo deck. So lots happening. But again, we want this to be a fun, replayable format. Losing on turn 3 all the time, when your opponent just casts one card, it's not that fun. If you can never go over the top of your opponent, or they always have the perfect sideboard card, sort of out of the mono green deck, not that fun. So yes, there's going to be changes to the format. You'll have to wait until Monday.
Yeah.
Monday. All right.
Also, I will add with Pioneer, with the ban list, we're always looking. We're always constantly looking at the ban list, and we're also thinking about things that we could possibly release from the ban list when we're talking about BNR with Pioneer. So it's important to keep in mind that the streak goes both ways. We can take things away. We can also give things back. So definitely keep that in mind when you're thinking about BNR.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, like over time, the format just has more cards, right? More cards will be into format, which means the most powerful cards from each release will probably be in the format, which means just over time, naturally, the format will get more powerful. And we should be reevaluating the BNR list as the format becomes more powerful, because maybe there's things on there that were banned years ago, and they could be released. There's always a risk when you do an unbanning. And so we try and be really careful, really talk a lot about it, and only make the best decisions.
Try to make the best decision.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so speaking of unbans, we had one not too long ago in Modern with Preordained, so I think that's a good segue to start talking about Modern. First, since that's what I'm using as a segue, is Preordained, how satisfied have you all been with that unban?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty great.
Happy with Preordained Unbanned so far.
It looked like it was safe to do so, and not saying we're going to open the floodgates or anything for Modern, but we definitely are going to keep looking for chances to take cards off the BNR lists. It's not really our goal that they're as small as possible, but we would not be doing our due diligence if we weren't considering what cards could come off of all the lists.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk more about Modern generally. Modern's a very different format than Pioneer, so how do you all think about the philosophy of BNR and Modern?
So yeah, again, just describing it's sort of in a different spot than Pioneer and Standard. It does get content. We have our Modern Horizon sets. We have the Lord of the Rings sets. And again, sort of the same trickle from Standard where the most powerful cards come down there. And yeah, it's certainly more powerful than Pioneer. And we're okay with that. We want it to be, different from these. Each format just has to have its own identity. We want them to maintain their differences. So we sort of have been tracking Modern since the Pro Tour in Barcelona, Pro Tour the Lord of the Rings, through the whole regional championship qualifier cycle. And at the time, we last spoke with you guys about Modern. We were saying, hey, we're going to keep an eye on these Lord of the Rings cards, the Bowmasters, the One Ring, the Black-Red Evoke deck, the time Tron was doing well, Rhinos, all this stuff. And since then, we've, seen not much has changed since that event. So we gave it a little bit of time to see if, Black-Red Evoke deck won the Pro Tour. Can the format evolve? But really, more people just started playing Black-Red Evoke deck. Cards like Fury subsidized on sort of both ends with You're Not Dead Already, I think is, in those card variants, the one mana black
Not
spells.
dead after all.
Not dead after all. My bad.
All the one mana black.
Malakir Rebirth.
It's Undying Evil.
Undying Evil. There's
the
a
Magic
whole
Millennials.
gamut of them. And then on the other end, with cards like Up the Beanstalk, where no matter how you kind of cast it, you're just getting immense value. And it's keeping a lot of 1 toughness creatures at bay. That with the Bowmasters as well. So it's pretty clear something should be done. We want, again, as many decks as possible. We want as many cards to be an option for you as possible. And if we have all these cards that are saying don't play 1 toughness creatures, well, what is that keeping away?
Right.
1 toughness creatures?
Yes.
Is there 1 toughness creatures? Okay, great. All right. Okay, so let's be clear. Are there changes coming to Modern on Monday?
You can expect changes.
Yes, there
to
will
Modern
be changes in Modern.
on Monday.
Let's move on to Legacy, the next deadline. So tell us about the philosophy of Legacy, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, so our philosophy with these older formats is definitely a lot more based on the community sentiment, given how, when you're a Legacy player, you have to invest a lot into playing Legacy. Same with Vintage, owning Power 9, owning all these Fetchlands, duels, it's difficult. So when we talk about these sort of formats, we really want to make sure that we're listening to the community first and foremost. So we like to track, obviously we'll still track win rates, play rates, all that kind of stuff. And we'll look at these graphs and think, hey, is there anything crazy here? But unlike for those other formats, we're going to focus mostly on how the community is talking about the format and if they enjoy it the most.
Yeah, if we use the same exact approach for Legacy and Vintage, Brainstorm, Force of Will, Wasteland, these cards would have all been gone long ago. But we don't, we want there to be a place for those cards from Magic's history to be played. And that's the place for those kind of things. But yeah, like Andrew said, we're tracking everything. Orcus Bowmasters is doing a lot in Legacy in particular. There's these interesting 4-color Uro control decks, sometimes using 4th Year Lingus, almost always using Up the Beanstalk and Leyline Binding. It's got its own Dimir Evoke deck. There's like 4 different Delver decks now, which is awesome to see. So we're pretty happy with the way things are evolving, using new cards, not only from things like Wilds of Eldraine with like Questing Druid and Up the Beanstalk, but also from some of the LTR, Commander, even the Commander products.
Yeah. I know, Dan, you briefly mentioned it, but I do want to kind of like say it more clearly here. When we're talking about each of these formats and how we curate them, it's really important that all of them kind of stand out from one of each other, so that if you want a different kind of play experience, there is that available to you. So that's why we generally try to treat these formats differently when we think about ban restricted.
Yep, that makes sense. So let's be clear, any changes coming to Legacy on Monday?
No, we're pretty keen on watching the format. Also, we're right in the middle, I believe, of a bunch of Eternal weekend events. So we'll definitely be monitoring the results there.
Yep.
But so far, it looks like there's a decent amount of diversity, and different decks can do well.
If you're ever mad, you can tweet at my boss, at Aaron Forsyth, with all of your complaints. He's going to love that.
He would love that. Same question for Vintage, which feels like kind of a microcosm, but it is it's the only format we restrict cards in.
Yeah, restricting is a very interesting tool. In fact, we only ban cards in that format if they're dexterity-based or anti-based or something, right?
So, or Luris.
Or Luris.
Luris is not banned?
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Unban Luris.
But we could, yeah. Luris is doing a number. I mean, there's a bunch of different Luris decks. I think the most interesting thing, I'll just start with no, we're not going to change anything in Vintage for this cycle. Lorien revealed the sort of island cycler from the Lord of the Rings sets, really gluing these mana bases together. You can play Luris, Lorien Revealed, Wasteland, Urza Saga, and still like cast your colored spells. It's pretty interesting to see. I think, like we said, it's a really small community, really passionate community. There's a lot to explore. Which is amazing for a 30-year history game, right? That there's still cards that are impacting the format, and we believe in a positive way. There's probably not enough players that play Vintage to explore all the options that are available. So yeah, for now we're pretty happy with Vintage.
All right. So this is the part of the show where we turn to you in chat. You've all been very active, and that's fantastic. Go ahead and put your questions in chat. We're going to actively look for them to answer. It helps if you tag at Magic in them. It just helps me find them a little bit faster. So I'm going to watch for that sort of stuff. In the meantime, let's preempt a bunch of questions. Because we are going to get a bunch of questions. There have been a bunch of comments about, ban this, what about this card, what about this card? So we're not going to tell you exactly what is happening on Monday, but let's tackle it this way. When you hear a lot of chatter about a specific card, someone says, please ban this card in this format. There's a lot of people talking about it. What do you do then? What is your thought process? What does the team start doing when they see that conversation rise up?
Yeah, so I'll generally kind of go over the process that we normally use. So we'll generally have a meeting tagged for a certain date before our announcement, probably, I don't know, two or so weeks beforehand. But before that, we have format experts for each individual format. So, I'll generally assign somebody, hey, your job is to play this format, keep up with it, tell me what you think of the format, which is fun, what's not fun. And then probably about a month before the date or something, we'll start up a thread where everybody will kind of give their 2 cents on each individual card, each individual format. And then right before the meeting, I'll generally tabulate all of that information and then kind of present that as a whole to the group in terms of like, hey, here's what we're seeing, here's what people are thinking, what do you think of these options? We could do this, this, that. What would that mean? Like Dan was saying, when you set up a plan, there's lots of things that could happen, and we like to kind of see all of our options up front. So yeah, basically a lot of work goes into it, I guess, long story short.
Yeah, for sure. Involves us, meeting with about 20 different people, and all just hashing it out. What's going to happen if we do this, that, the other thing? Cards that people mention are cards we discuss, and we use our best heuristics to try and make the right decision.
Well, and I like, one of the things that people probably don't understand about the discussion that I find really fascinating, because I get to be a fly on the wall on these discussions. It's not like this card, this card, this card. At the end, you all talk about sort of packages, because you want to look at the effect on the whole format and not just is this card, is this card, is this card.
Yeah. So like you were saying, you know, if we just did the one at a time approach, it's a lot harder to then kind of predict down the line what will happen. When you think of the changes more holistically, you can probably get a better picture of, you know, what will happen if we do X changes, what will happen if we do Y changes. So I'd say that's probably the biggest difference.
Yeah, kind of sounds like a theme. If you do too much of that too, like you don't actually know what your changes did. If you were to take a whole huge bat to the format and hit like 5 cards at once, you might not have needed to do that if you just hit in 2 cards. So it's always like what we've kind of a through line of our conversation is it's always many factors somewhere in the middle.
All right. Okay, so let's get to some other questions. One I saw earlier was questions about the question was phrased something like other TCGs occasionally use watch lists. We don't. Why don't we use watch lists? And would we ever consider that in the future?
I wouldn't say we use like a clear watch list, but if you do go look back at the article where we had right after Pro Tour Barcelona for the Lord of the Rings, we said we're keeping an eye on the Orcish Bowmasters, the One Ring. So you'll be able to pick on stuff like that. But yeah, we're not too heavy-handed with that tactic, and I think it can create a little bit of like hesitancy. Like I don't know if I should ever play that deck if you said it's on the watch list. Like I'm scared now. I don't want to. And then we don't ever do anything, and then you just never collected the cards you wanted.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think there's a perception too, because we've talked about this at a few different points. I've been here for 10 years, so it's come up occasionally. But I feel like we've also talked about, well, is the watch list a step before banning? Can we not ban something if it wasn't on the watch list? And if we ban something that's not on the watch list, are we then lying to people or confusing them? And so I do think that we've been more liberal. We used to back in the day not even want to mention other cards like that we were thinking of. We've certainly opened that up and been more liberal about, well, we're watching this, we're watching this. But
yeah, and I think this is like a good moment to mention, like we're sort of I would say moving a little bit on the spectrum of like we want to be more open about these kind of things. You all are so passionate about this game. We're extremely passionate as well. We want to share that passion with you and give you a little bit more insight into our thoughts, and that's kind of why we're here today.
Yeah, I do think moving forward, it was pretty clear from our last no changes update that people really wanted to hear more from us, and I think you can expect a lot more of that moving forward in terms of what is our thought process, how do we think about the state of the format. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for something in that vein.
So I've seen some questions about that September 8th announcement as well. So let's talk a little bit about that. First, live ball. It's on me. So here's what happened. The September 8th date that had no changes was the old cadence of when we do BNR announcements. We shouldn't have even had one on that date. I keep the calendar for when our announcements are made, and so I was like, yeah, this is when this is happening. And it was the wrong date. And as such, the time that the team had built into their process essentially didn't happen. There wasn't enough time to look at the formats, and so the consensus at that time was, well, not enough has changed because not enough time has passed. And so that is step one. That was problem one. My bad. We're back on the right cadence now. But we did also get the question of what has changed in that time that made you all look at changes to Pioneer and Modern.
Yeah, so I think for Modern, we didn't want to gut react to that Pro Tour. Pro Tours are not the largest tournament, but they're pretty big. And then usually the metagame can adapt or shifts after a deck wins an event or you see what the best decks are.
Right.
And so we were going to just track the regional championship season. There was one both for Pioneer and for Modern, and see what happened. So it didn't look like the metagame has adapted very well to the black-red deck's dominance. And even the deck right under that, which is the 4-color Omnath deck, now using the Up the Beanstalk card, also has at least one card in common. So yeah, we thought, well, now it sounds like a good time to change that. And then, yeah, for Pioneer, it's we didn't have like a lot of solid high level data until this
Yep.
season happened. And so, you know, that September 8th date, it was a little too early for us. We wish like half season was right in the middle of the season.
Right.
So we were like, we want to see the full picture or as much of it as we can before we get to December 4th. And then LCI came out, shook everything up a little bit. So yeah, we just have a lot more information to act on now, and acting we will do.
Yeah. And yeah, I think one of the differences I do want to highlight more between Pioneer and Modern is that our current set releases, like the main Magic sets that we release every 3 months or so, they're going to have a larger impact on Pioneer than Modern.
Yeah.
Generally, I would say most of them, nearly all of them.
All right, the next question I got, I'll take this one because it's a pretty clear answer. So the people are asking about, will these changes affect Arena? Modern's not on Arena. Explorer is close. So the philosophy that Arena has put forward is, in as much as the cards exist on Arena, they will match any changes in Explorer. So if there are changes, in Pioneer on Monday. All the changes that can be reflected in Arena will be reflected.
Yep, and I will also say that we heavily involve the Arena team in all of our discussions.
Yep.
You know, Blake said that he was a fly on the wall. We have multiple people from the Arena team there, and also when we discuss things offline as well, we like to involve them. So it's definitely a cross-departmental function.
Yeah. Well, they're also one of your best sources for data as
Definitely, yeah. So it's helpful.
All right. We have we had a series of questions about Eternal formats, and specifically your philosophy and thinking around how often you unban things in those formats. We're pretty shy with it, but we did just do one in Modern, so talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and we did Mind's Desire
Mind's
and
Desire
Legacy
and
too.
Legacy,
That was like a fun couple weeks. People were trying to play with it, but it was pretty clearly too weak.
Yeah.
Yeah, unbanning is just a really interesting series of decisions. You know, we ban cards for a reason, right? So there's a reason that they're there in the first place. But you know, Magic evolves over time; it changes, and there's just the way I think about it is this: you know, risk versus reward. So what is the benefit of unbanning a card, and what could go wrong? Like what are like the polars? You know, I think the thing we hear the most, right, is like free Splinter Twin. I think we all believe internally, and I would say many externally, it's just too much of a risk. Maybe it's weaker than it was, but that sort of like all the mana's open, flash creature, kill you, like that's just not that fun. I mean, some people do have fun with it, but I would say more people don't. So yeah, it's just a lot of discussing, a lot of like, what could go wrong here? What's the worst possible scenario? We ended up, if people remember, a long time ago in Modern, we had Golgari Grave Troll banned.
Yep.
We unbanned it. Oops. 6 months later, it was banned again, or I don't remember how long. But yeah, we would really not like to do that. And it's not just because we would look silly. It's because you will all go collect cards to play those, to build that deck again, right? And then we're going to pull the rug right from underneath you and say, oh, sorry, no, it's banned again. That's not a very fun thing for your collection to go through.
Yeah.
I think that dovetails nicely into a question I've been seeing a bit of. What would it take to ban something in the current RCQ format in the middle of the season? Rakdos of Oak has been dominating for months, and nothing was done earlier in the season. So obviously we just mentioned Pioneer changes are coming, but can you talk a little bit about the considerations you give to tournaments and RCQs and that sort of deal?
We give a ton of credence to when tournaments are happening, to our decisions with BNR. Like I was saying, we have you and the Arena team there. We also have Huey Jensen and Scott Larrabee there in terms of talking about tournament timing, like, hey, if we want to make a decision here, how would that affect tournaments down the road? What tournaments will be affected if we do make this decision at this time? So again, like, there's a ton of factors that go into this, and we do very much listen to, you know, when is this tournament happening? How many players would this affect? That very much goes into our thought process.
Yeah, I mean, you're all building decks and preparing for events, and there's going to be like a maximum a tolerance. Like, okay, I can tolerate this format. People are building decks for it, but there's a breaking point at some point, like it's just too much. Yes, we will disrupt your preparation and your deck collecting. And so finding that line, maybe black-red was really close to it. It's kind of subjective.
Yep.
But we believed it was better to let the most amount of people who were already preparing for the events they were planning for, getting their cards for, to do as much of the tournament series as they could. We are aware that there's a couple more tournaments still left that will get affected, but this is the least amount of disruption we could do.
Well,
Right.
and to that point, that's one of the reasons we're having this stream when we're having it and being clear that changes are coming to Pioneer and Modern, because we want people to be prepared for those changes ahead of those tournaments.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, I think U.S. Regional Championship is in a couple weeks.
Yep.
And so hopefully this is a little bit of information for those going to that event.
Yeah, and we were players. Both Dan and I played on the Pro Tour for years, played in all these events, and we know what it takes to prepare for these tournaments, and we know that what disruption means when it comes to taking out a certain card.
Yep.
All my work goes out the window. I have to scramble and get a new deck. Like, we've definitely all been through that, and we understand what that means for players.
Yep. All right. I'm going to take this next question. I'm seeing a couple variations of when will we know what's happening with Fetchlands and Historic on Arena specifically, because Khans of Tarkir, if you don't know, is coming out December 12th. Is that the Tuesday? December 12th is when Khans of Tarkir re-releases on Magic Gang Arena. Very exciting. We're calling that kind of Throwback Tuesday because we got some Ravnica Remastered stuff going on that day as well. So if you're old like me, or if you just like some older sets, December 12th is going to be a really fun day for you. Whether you're a fan of Khans of Tarkir, you can play it on Arena, or Ravnica Remastered. We're going to be showing off a bunch of that set on that day. Anyway, mark that in your calendars. But as for the Fetchlands, you're going to learn more about that, what's happening with that next week, I believe. I think it's either on the 4th or the 5th, either on Monday or Tuesday. You'll learn more from the Arena team about what is happening with Fetchlands from Khans of Tarkir. All right, next question is, do you ever, or I'm looking for how this was referenced, but basically the question was, do you ever consider functional errata instead of banning a card?
We have considered it at times. It is a nuclear option. I will say, to the extent that we have considered it, we generally, if we feel like it's a possibility, we'll talk about it, but I would say it is generally incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, I mean the companions, right?
Yes.
We last time we did that I can recall, and before that, I don't know.
We've talked about it a few times,
Yes.
but never actually pulled the trigger.
Yes.
Yeah, we would generally like your cards to do what they say on the card,
Yeah.
as much as possible. So,
Back in Magic's earlier days, it sometimes happened, but that was because the wording was sometimes inconsistent as well. There was a fellow oldie in the chat who mentioned Rook Egg.
oof.
I see you. I know what you're talking about. All right. Next up, let's talk about. So there was a good question about how much does it affect your discussions or decisions as to whether the cards that are under discussion are currently being sold. So you've actually mentioned a few cards. You've talked about LCI. How much does that weigh into your decision?
I would say very little. Again, our main goal with the formats is that they are fun and replayable and that you enjoy doing them. Just because something is a premier product or whatever doesn't really factor much into our decision in terms of, making the formats as fun as they are.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
pretty succinct answer there. So.
Yeah, fun is paramount over what's currently the booster pack du jour. I mean, point to Omnath, point to Oko. Those are just a couple weeks into the format, right? And we still were like, yeah, sorry, we did not do that right.
Yep. And I think the nice thing about Magic now is there are so many formats. Just because something is banned in one format doesn't mean it's not playable in others, and that you can't play in your Commander deck, or that it's not still good in Standard Pioneer, or if it's banned in Modern, whatever.
Yeah, Omnath's still getting played in Modern, and Oko's still getting played in Vintage.
Yep.
With the Druids.
All right. And then just some people calling out Rook Egg and Time Vault was another one that had functional errata, but like 12 different times. That was, yeah. So here's a question we touched on early in the stream, but some people might have missed it or might want us to dive deeper. Question is, you've mentioned fun a number of times.
Yep.
How is fun measured?
Yeah, I'll go over this again,
Sure.
I guess. So fun is definitely one of the more subjective words in the English language, but obviously it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But that's kind of the beauty of Magic, as I see it, is that so many different people can interpret fun in a different way. So when you actually get down to the question of what does fun mean, coming from me as a player, I think XYZ interactions are fun. Whatever, I like gaining 1 life when I play my land.
Yeah.
When you look at it from the perspective of Wizards, when we're thinking about game design, we think of what is the maximum fun that the most people will have. So I'll give you an example. So let's talk about land destruction. So I would say 10% of people who play Magic really love land destruction. On the other hand, 80% of the people really hate it. So when you're talking about net fun there's a pretty big gap in terms of what things we will actually print and what things we will actually encourage. So when we're thinking about fun on a large scale, it's more about how many people will find this fun versus how many people will find this not as fun.
Yeah.
And then we kind of take that into account. It's very nebulous, obviously, but we have a lot of game designers here. They're focused on fun. They want to understand how people have fun. So
yeah, I love your land destruction example because I've probably cast more thermokarsts than most people.
Yeah, I won a tournament with Miracles and Sensei Divining Top, and I know that's not a very counterbalance, right? You would like to cast your spells, and I didn't want you to do that. So as a player, that's something I enjoy, but as a designer, I understand that I have a bias, right? A player bias, and then we all keep that in mind while thinking about what we want to do. And like you said, the most amount of people we should have fun for. I want to bring up one little point. Sort of like if you look at Standard right now, kind of like every archetype, macro archetype, I'd call them mid-range, aggro, control, and a little bit of combo even.
combo ramp.
Combo are all present, and so that's probably a good place for combo to have the least amount of representation. Standard. Some people do like putting A plus B plus C together and going off, but for a lot of other people, they just want to play attacking Magic, removal spell, curve, that kind of thing. So we try and keep them that is more okay for like Modern and Legacy and Vintage.
Right.
But we saw the Agatha Soul Cauldron deck pop up, and I think it was the Bramble Familiar sort of a Cascade deck.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and one of the other points I want to make, because I see people talking about fun as sort of nebulous, is fun is sort of a blanket term for a lot of things we look at. We talked about the data, but we also look at tournament attendance data is sort of an underrated data point because it tells us people just are choosing not to engage with the format. Whatever the win rate is, if people are choosing not to engage with the format, that indicates a problem. The classic example is Ravager Affinity Standard, where standard attendance just plummeted, and the win rate looked fine because people were playing Shatter main deck, and it was very clearly an outlier that caused people to disengage with the format. So I think that's one of the other aspects we look at when we talk about fun.
Yeah, that brings up, I think, 2 data points. One is our current Modern RCQ season is the highest attended season since we've started doing that series.
Yeah.
And then I believe since we've come out of the pandemic and had tabletop play again, what was the stat that you had said?
Yes, standard play rates are at its highest since the pandemic.
In local game stores.
In local game stores.
Yeah.
Like Friday Night Magic type stuff, or
Yeah.
like weekly tournaments. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not like that doesn't like 100% say yes, this is fun, but it is a data point we can use to be like, okay, well, more people are playing than they were, so that's a good sign.
So it's going in the right direction.
Right.
Makes sense. Next up, so we had a couple people asking if we can do more things like this in the future because they've enjoyed the openness and transparency. So,
yeah, I would love to. I think Andrew alluded to it before. When we did the no changes announcement and wrote nothing, we don't want to do that again. So we definitely want to, even if we decide no changes are appropriate, give you a little bit of a glimpse into why we think that. So sort of my pledge, since our team is the most involved with this, is to say yes for all the rest of the announcements till the end of time. It's hard to say anything till the end of time. We will make sure we include something, and then I'm really interested in doing during the big rotational window a sort of state of each of the formats, each of the 5 that we've been talking about. And we can, I'd be happy to have us come on the show again and talk through that again, or at the very least promise you it will be an article.
Yeah, minimum article, and then if the timing works out, we'll do a show. If we've got stuff to talk about, we'll absolutely do it, and we'll check in here and there after it's been. Of course. I think for this one it's good just because it's been a while. It's been since you went on the Pro Tour stream to talk about the state of standard and the change to the BNR for us to really dive into it. So I think it's good to do. What was the next one? I think we are nearing the end of questions that we can answer, but let's make sure. All right. If my pet Pioneer cards were left out of their block remaster, this is an arena question, and they're not in a big meta deck, should I expect them never to come to Explorer or Arena? So I'll reiterate the goals that the Arena team has set out for Explorer. The goal is not to have every legal card for Pioneer in Explorer. The goal is to have every relevant tournament card available so that the Explorer metagame matches essentially the tabletop Pioneer metagame. And that's going to be when they feel that it's there. So they're random 2/2s for 2 that are flyers or whatever won't make it. But and if there's a pet card, they do the sort of anthologies that sometimes include just fun cards that are not meta. So it doesn't mean it's not coming back, but the goal is tournament fidelity. Let's see. There was a question. Oh, so I have seen a bunch of questions on, people I think responded well to the Pioneer experiment where we essentially did, when we launched Pioneer, very few bans right off the bat, and we let people play and show us. Has there been any discussion about doing that for other formats, do sort of a reset? Modern is the one that they keep asking about.
No.
I agree, no.
Okay, fair enough. Next question that I've seen a couple times is have you ever discussed restricting in cards that are in formats that are not vintage?
So just to go back, we made Pioneer, right? It was a brand new format.
Yeah.
We just had the widest open ban list possible, and very few cards, right? And so that made sense to do at the time. I'm not saying maybe in however many years there's another format that is cool and wants to be played. Maybe we'll do it again. Yeah. But yeah, it's not a topical discussion.
Okay.
And then, have we ever discussed restricting a card not in vintage? Yes.
Yeah, I think that one kind of dovetails into what I was saying earlier about have we discussed functional errata?
Yeah.
So obviously there are tons of different solutions that you can propose to fix a certain problem. We definitely go through a lot of them. I'll even mention one of the most interesting ones we've ever seriously discussed was during the Feldar Guardian and Saheeli time frame. We discussed something called pair banning.
Yeah.
Where you cannot play those 2 cards in the same 75 ever.
Yeah.
So I'm just using that as an example to say that there are tons of off-beaten path solutions. We definitely talk about them all the time. But when it comes to implementing them or shipping them, not our favorite.
Yeah. I actually remember that meeting vividly because there was pair banning. I think we talked about functional errata. We talked about restricting. Yep. There were a number of kind of off-the-wall ideas thrown out there. So yeah. If you can think of it, it's probably been discussed. For a variety of reasons, they don't happen. Pair banning. God, that would be
the simplest answer is generally the correct one. Magic's already hard enough.
Absolutely. All right. I think we are slowing down on questions. So, any last thoughts? Anything else you wanted to make sure to say before we head into next Monday?
No, I hope that this was a good look into our thought process, and happy to read the comments after we get off the stream and see what other kind of things y'all are interested in hearing about from kind of our wheelhouse, how we think about managing formats. We know you all really love Magic just as much as we do, and we want ourselves to play the game in its most fun forms. So yeah, it's been awesome being on the show with you guys.
I will answer one question that seems to be the topic of note right now is why not just do this now instead of next Monday? So what is actually happening is the ban was always going to be Monday. This is us giving you a heads up and also taking the opportunity to talk more about it. To what Dan said earlier, we try to be minimally disruptive to events that are coming up. And so knowing that we are making changes in Pioneer and Modern, if you missed that earlier, there are changes in Pioneer and Modern coming on Monday. This is us giving you the heads up, basically. So it was either this or everybody just finds out on Monday. So I hope that this was good and that you all enjoyed this and that we can do more things like this in the future. Now, besides the BNR announcement on Monday, there is a bunch of stuff coming up the first 2 weeks in December. We're going to be busy. So next week on this show is actually going to be our first look at Murders at Karlov Manor. So we're going to get our very first look at that. We're going to talk more about play boosters at that point because Murders at Karlov Manor is the first set that has play boosters. So we'll unveil a little bit more of that. We'll show you some example play boosters. It'll all be a good time. So because we're showing example play boosters, there will be more previews than normal for a first look. It'll be a good time. The week after that, December 12th, as I said, is sort of Throwback Tuesday. On Arena, you'll be able to play Khans of Tarkir. Really cool throwback format. But not only that, we'll be revealing the bulk of the Ravnica Remastered set right here. And actually, you know what? Fun thing we're doing with that one, so we're actually revealing Ravnica Remastered over 2 days on 2 shows. We're finishing things off on Tuesday, but on Monday, Tolarian Community College will have an episode of Shuffle Up and Play that will reveal a bunch of stuff from Ravnica Remastered. So you'll want to tune in for that. So December is a big, at least the first 2 weeks of December. Then we're done.
Yeah.
Vacation. Holidays, a lot of cool stuff. But a lot of cool stuff coming up in the next couple weeks. So Monday, tune in for that BNR, and then Tuesday, come right back here for your first look at Murders at Karlov Manor. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.